Zion was the city Yahweh chose, a mountain marked by his name, a ridge set apart from the plains, a place where justice was meant to flow as steadily as the spring running beneath its stones. Its gates stood as courts of right-weighing judgment. Its priests were appointed to teach Torah, its kings to shepherd the people with a steady hand. Zion belonged to Yahweh because Yahweh placed his name there. But Scripture bears witness to a painful truth. A chosen city can become a corrupted city. A people who walk in covenant can bend their path until they resemble the very rebellion they were called to resist. In the days of the kings, elders, priests, and prophets, Zion reached such a crossroads. The same pattern that once shaped Babel on the plain of Shinar began rising inside Yahweh's own house. One compromise led to another. One crooked decision invited the next. Slowly, quietly, Zion began to take on the shadow of Babylon. Prophets walked the streets and shouted the ancient cry, "How has the faithful city become a harlot?" Not in an abstract sense, but in Yahweh's courtroom language, a city giving its covenant gifts to another master. In Zion's markets, unjust weights appeared. In her courts, bribery replaced justice. In her alleys, blood was shed. In her houses, lies and sorcery found a home. Foreign alliances tugged at her heart, and altars shaped like Babylon's shrines rose within sight of Yahweh's own courts. Part 2 tells how this happened, how priests twisted Torah, how kings built palaces while neglecting the oppressed, how prophets stood alone against leaders who no longer feared Yahweh, and how the city of Yahweh became a city from which Yahweh himself would depart. This is the turning point of the story, the moment Zion becomes the very thing she was called to resist. Zion was meant to shine with Yahweh's weight. Her priests were meant to guard his teaching. Her kings were meant to shepherd like David. But step by step, Zion's shape changed. The transformation was not an earthquake, but erosion. Slow, steady, bending the straight path into a crooked one. Isaiah stood at the gates and cried, "How has the faithful city become a harlot?" This was covenant language, Yahweh's accusation that Zion had taken his gifts, his name, his covenant, and offered them to other powers. The signs were not symbolic, they were physical. Silver turned to dross, wine-diluted princes loving bribes, orphans abandoned, widows forgotten, hands stained with blood. The gates meant for justice now sold justice to the highest bidder. Zion began to look and act like Babylon. Under King Manasseh, Jerusalem filled with carved images, pillars, star worship, sorcery, divination, and child offerings in the valley of Hinnom. The house where Yahweh placed his name now held altars to foreign gods. The mountain where Abraham found Yahweh's provision now echoed with Babylonian rites. Jeremiah warned the people that temple walls could not hide covenant betrayal. At the city gates, the heart of Zion's public life, a different spirit ruled. False weights tipped the scales. Merchants squeezed the poor. Judges favored the wealthy. Prophets spoke only for payment. Priests taught only for hire. Amos cried, "You turn justice into bitterness." And Micah declared that leaders claimed Yahweh's presence while walking a crooked path that reeked of Babylon. Ezekiel revealed the depth of Zion's betrayal. Garments Yahweh gave her dressing idols. Yahweh's food placed before foreign gods. Her children offered in fire. Her gates opened to alliances with nations that despised the covenant. A harlot in Hebrew thought is not an immoral woman, but a city misusing Yahweh's gifts. Zion, chosen and beloved, had become such a city. As the city bent toward Babylon, Yahweh raised prophets as watchmen on broken walls. They cried, "Turn back to the straight path. Wash your hands from blood. Set the scales straight. Walk low under Yahweh's yoke. Break the high places." They were stoned, beaten, mocked, imprisoned, yet they held the line, pleading for Zion to return. Then came the most tragic moment in Zion's history. Yahweh left. The throne chariot rose from the threshold, paused at the east gate, ascended the mountain opposite the city, and departed. The house, once filled with his weight, became an empty shell. Zion had become Babylon, and not because Babylon conquered her, but because she walked Babylon's path by her own feet. Exile is one of the deepest wounds of the covenant story, not because the journey was far, but because Yahweh's people were forced to dwell in the very city that opposed his ways from the beginning. Zion is a mountain city fed by springs. Babylon is a plain city fed by a mighty river. Zion is a name-dwelling place. Babylon is an idol-bearing empire. Zion is covenant life. Babylon is enforced assimilation. Yet even in exile, Yahweh preserved a remnant, a people who refused to exchange his name for Babylon's. The exiles sat by the Euphrates, weeping when they remembered Zion. Babylon's river boasted of empire, irrigating fields, feeding armies, powering trade. But the remnant longed for Zion's springs, the quiet waters flowing from Yahweh's dwelling. Their captors demanded a song, not understanding that Zion's melodies rose from covenant, not performance. The exiles hung their harps on willow trees, a quiet act of resistance. Psalm 46 describes the river that makes glad the city of Elohim, the hidden spring beneath Zion. Babylon's river is broad and proud. Zion's spring is pure and covenant-rooted. Exile placed two waters side by side, forcing a choice. Which water would shape their identity? Babylon renamed Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, stamping them with the titles of its gods. But the remnant remembered the names Yahweh gave. In Hebrew thought, a name is calling, allegiance, destiny. Babylon tried to rewrite their story, but Yahweh preserved their true identity. The king's food symbolized assimilation. Daniel refused, asking only for simple fare, vegetables, and water, a daily act of loyalty. Each meal became a covenant stand. We will not partake of Babylon's table. Nebuchadnezzar erected a golden image demanding all nations bow. The furnace blazed 7 times hotter, yet the remnant stood firm. Yahweh can deliver us, but even if he does not, we will not serve your gods. Thrown into the fire, they walked unharmed with Yahweh's messenger. Babylon's fire destroys, Yahweh's fire preserves. The king's image, crafted likeness, empire worship, music, and threat foreshadowed the pattern Revelation later reveals. Babylon always seeks visible allegiance, bowed heads, kneeling bodies, unified crowds. The remnant resisted not by overthrowing the empire, but by refusing to bow. When the decree came forbidding prayer to any god but the king, Daniel opened his window toward Jerusalem and prayed 3 times a day. He faced a ruined city, a burned house, shattered gates, yet Zion remained his compass. Identity in exile is directional. Face Zion. Honor Yahweh. Keep the covenant. Babylon offered comfort, status, wealth, new customs, and new gods. But the remnant kept Yahweh's name, remembered Zion's springs, refused Babylon's food, rejected the golden image, prayed toward Jerusalem, and walked in covenant integrity. Their identity came not from their location, but from Yahweh's covenant. Part 2 traces one of the darkest arcs in the entire covenant story, the transformation of Zion into a Babylon-shaped city. We watched the faithful city become crooked. We saw the gates of justice turn into gates of bribery. We heard the valley echo with the cries of children in fire. We watched priests teach for hire, prophets silenced, and kings trust foreign powers. We saw Yahweh depart his house, but the story does not end in ruin. Even as Babylon marched, Yahweh preserved a remnant, small in number, scarred by judgment, but steady in covenant loyalty. Their identity came not from walls or towers, but from Yahweh's name, Torah, covenant, and promise. They wept by Babylon's rivers, but their hearts drank from Zion's springs. They refused Babylon's food, names, idols, and demands. They prayed toward a ruined mountain, knowing Yahweh would rebuild what human hands had torn down. Zion had fallen, but Yahweh had not forgotten his mountain, nor his promise, nor his name. And so the story turns toward the next movement, the return, the rebuilding, and the long struggle to restore covenant life in a land still bearing Babylon's scars.